What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I'm recording this on Tuesday, June 2nd, and the NBA Finals kick off tomorrow night. So for today's podcast, I'm going to do a full preview of the NBA Finals and do a similar format to what I've done over the past few seasons, which is talk about the key swing factors for this series and the things that I think if one team decisively has the advantage in the majority of these swing factors, then I think they have the upper hand in terms of winning this final series. And then after that, I'll talk about what's at stake here for both of these teams. What would a win mean for the Knicks and the Spurs? What would a loss mean for the Knicks and the Spurs? And then, of course, at the end, I will give my formal prediction and who I think will win between San Antonio and New York in this final. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to start off by talking about how these teams got here and the subsequent moves that were made to assemble these finals rosters. On the Knicks side of things, it's been a pretty bleak century for the Knicks so far before Brunson arrived. So before Jalen Brunson became a member of the New York Knicks this century, they only accumulated one total playoff series win back in 2013, only two 50-win seasons. They have not made the finals since 1999, ironically enough, against the Spurs. That's been a 27-year drought. They have not won a championship since 1973. That was 53 years ago, pre-NBA-ABA merger. And things were looking very, very dark for the Knicks, particularly from 2015 to 2020, sort of the back end of the Carmelo Anthony era there. Over those 6 seasons, they had a 30.9% win percentage, which is only 25-win pace over that span, including a 21-win season, 2 separate 17-win seasons. And they didn't have a lot to show from it in terms of drafting top-level guys. You know, they got a little unlucky in the lottery. The highest pick they did have was in 2019, and they took R.J. Barrett, who okay player, but certainly not the star that they had hoped he would turn into when they took him 3rd overall in that draft. But the offseason of 2020 was sort of what got this turnaround going. They hired Tom Thibodeau to be sort of that culture setter and to turn the franchise around. And he really did kind of set the tone and put things in motion to do that. They signed Julius Randle that offseason as well, which, you know, kind of made fun of at the time of like, that's your big free agent signing. But honestly, for all of the hate Julius Randle gets, and I think he deserves a lot of it, that signing was huge for them, and it did really propel them into relevancy because he wins Most Improved Player in 2021, puts together an all-NBA level season. They go 41-31 to make the playoffs. They lose in the Hawks in the first round, but that was still sort of step one of them phasing out of this rebuild that, again, was it's not really like they rebuilt much with those down years. They still kind of relied on external ads to get to where they wanted to go. But they regressed massively in 2022, missed the playoffs. Randall had a very bad year that year. And the summer before 2022, they signed Jalen Brunson. This was really the key domino here to a 4-year, $104 million deal, which was viewed by most as an overpay. And myself including, I mean, I didn't hate it, but I wasn't sitting here saying like, oh my God, what a great signing by the Knicks. But he broke out in a massive way and a fashion that we don't see super often. The guy goes from basically a role player, develops into a star player on his second team, and he's just gotten better and better and better each season. And then during that 2022 year, they trade for Josh Hart midseason as well, gave up Cam Reddish, some fillers, and a protected first-round pick that eventually became Chris Murray. They finally do win a playoff series this round for just the second time this century, losing the second round to Miami. But again, continue to just make progress, get better year over year. The consistency and culture that Tibbs had set was really starting to set in. Brunson was developing into the star. Randall was a nice number 2 next to him. Then in 2024, before that season, they signed Dante DiVincenzo to a 4-year, $47 million deal. During that regular season, they trade for OG Anunoby, for RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and 1 second-round pick, which in retrospect looks like quite the heist for the Knicks. They have Isaiah Hartenstein ascend to be not only a legitimate rotation center, but a very high level starting center in the league. They win 50 games in 2024. They end up losing in the second round to the Pacers, but that was a tough series for them injury wise. OG Anunoby goes down with a hamstring. Julius Randle did not play the entire postseason, and Mitchell Robinson got hurt against Philadelphia in round one in that playoffs as well. So they were massively undermanned. And, the thought of them making the conference finals era would have been pretty ridiculous based on where they were at. But after 2024, they made some pretty sizable moves to continue to go all in. They trade 5 first-round picks and a pick swap for Mikal Bridges. They swapped DiVincenzo Randle and a first that eventually became Johan Behringer for Karl Anthony Towns, making upside swings here and really kind of emptying the clip from an asset perspective to try to just maximize what this team could be. And in 2025, they win 51 games, get to the postseason, unexpectedly beat the Celtics in round 2 as massive underdogs, fall short to the Pacers in the conference finals, but I'm not going to fault them too much for that. That Pacers team kind of felt like the team of destiny. And, they were obviously very formidable. They made it to game 7 against OKC. And if Halbert had not got hurt, very well could have won that series potentially. But they somewhat controversially fire Tom Thibodeau after that, then hire Mike Brown, who at the time seemed like their 5th option or something like that. They were going around to basically any team with a good coach asking if they could steal them away and had no luck there, not surprisingly. But they settle on Mike Brown, and then coming into 2026, it did kind of feel like a finals or bust season for them. The East was as weak as it's been in a long time, and the weakest it's probably going to be for a while because Jason Tatum out for most of the season, and I don't think anyone necessarily knew that he was going to come back. And the Celtics obviously way overperformed, but I don't think anyone really could have seen that coming. And at the end, in the postseason this year, they proved to be a little bit fraudulent anyway. Tyrese Halliburton. After the season, Pacers end up having a bottom feeder season this year. Damian Lillard goes down for the Bucks. They waive him. They bring back a much weaker roster than they've had over the past few years. Don't even make the playoffs. Joel Embiid, banged up all season, uncertainty with him, and couldn't really play for 2 consecutive weeks at a high level throughout this whole season. The Cavs continue to be unproven when it mattered most, and that played out in the playoffs this year as well. The Pistons, the Magic, a couple other teams, they're young, they're pretty good, but they're flawed ultimately. So if the Knicks were ever going to make this run to the finals, it really felt like it had to be this year. And this team's getting very expensive, and again, they kind of played all their cards with this core to an extent, with the Bridges deal specifically, potentially looking like a disaster if they never did kind of get over that hump. And it really handcuffed them from pursuing Giannis last offseason, which the reports came out later that was a real thing that maybe could have happened. And if they had the assets, I think it probably would have happened. But regardless, they go on to win the NBA Cup. They go through a bad stretch after that to start this season in January, February timeframe. And people were kind of down on them. They were kind of out. The Knicks were not necessarily a popular pick. People thought they were flawed because they've had their shortcomings over the past few seasons, but end up winning 53 games anyway. But they peaked at just the right time in this postseason, playing the Hawks, the Sixers, the Cavs, and just making easy, light work of those teams, looking completely dominant. They've won 11 straight games coming into the finals. They're 12-2 in the postseason overall. They have an NBA record plus 20.1 net rating heading into the finals. They have an NBA record plus 19 points for margin of victory. And so it's no fluke that they're here, even though the path was a little easier, but they pushed all their chips into the middle of the table, and it has paid off for them. And the funny thing for this team, which is very much against the modern conventional wisdom, is they built this entire team externally via trades and free agency. But almost every single move they've made over the last 5 years or so has been like a home run. Like Tibbs was not the right coach for this team at this point in this era of the team, but the hire back when they made it, obviously the right move. He helped set this culture and taught the team how to put in the effort needed to win through the grind of a regular season. And then eventually they moved on, but that was a great hire at the time. The Randall signing completely changed the trajectory of this team. The Brunson signing obviously is the move that none of this happens without that. But the Hart trade, in retrospect, absolute steal for them to get it for that cost. The finding Isaiah Hartenstein as sort of just a minimum undrafted player and They eventually lose him, but he was still huge for them when he was here. The DiVincenzo signing was great at a really reasonable cost and helped them build up additional assets alongside Randall to eventually get Karl Anthony Towns, which that trade looks like a absolute home run now for them at this point as well. Even though some people throughout points over the last few years have argued that the Wolves were the winners of that deal. I never personally went there, but that was a real narrative people had. And I think there's no question that the Knicks undoubtedly won that trade at this point. The OG Anunoby trade, another deal that in retrospect looks really, really silly for Toronto, and it's just steal for New York to not have to give a single first round pickup and two so rotation guys just for OG Anunoby. And then the Mikal Bridges trade, this one's been the only like real controversial move that they've made here. Obviously still a massive overpay, but hey, if they win the finals, then I don't think anybody's going to be talking negatively about that deal when we look back on it in history. And then the key move going into this season, firing Tom Thibodeau for Mike Brown, who's just been masterful for them. So a really unique way to get here through all trades and free agent signings rather than drafting any of these guys. But they just have continued to get better and better over each season. They've kind of added one or two guys to help just raise their ceiling, and it's all come to fruition this year. The Spurs, on the other hand, built their team very, very differently. After they traded Kawhi Leonard back in the summer of 2018, they had one decent year with the core of DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge in 2019. They won 48 games that year and were the 7th seed, did get bounced in the first round, but they quickly fell into a place you don't want to be, which is deep in mediocrity, not quite bad enough to be a bottom feeder, not good enough to be in the playoffs. The 2020, they win 32 games and are the 11 seed. 2021, they win 33 games. They're 10 seed, losing the play-in. 2022, they win 34 games and were the 10 seed, losing the play-in once again. But they finally decide to bottom out and sell off a lot of their core pieces. They cut bait with DeRozan after the 2020 season. LaMarcus Aldridge, it honestly just kind of got washed, and eventually they bottom out and he walked for nothing. But then they trade Derek White during the 2022 season for a first-round pick and a future swap. The first-round pick turned into Blake Wesley, but they still have that swap outstanding in 2028. They trade DeJounte Murray after that year for 3 first-round picks and a swap, one of those which has already turned into Carter Bryant. So that trade in retrospect looks really, really good for them. And then they kind of just decided to roll the young guys out there, see what they had with Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell and guys like Trey Jones and Jeremy Sohan. And the ultimate conclusion for most of those guys is that either they weren't very, very good or they were being miscast as go-to scorers. You look at Vassell and Johnson's stats a couple of years ago. Yeah, they're scoring 20 plus points per game, but it wasn't efficient. They weren't competing defensively. And so I think they quickly realized that those guys are better suited to be the role players around the stars they eventually add. And so they do go full tank with that group. In 2023, they win only 22 games, but get just lucky as hell and get the number 1 pick in a draft with a truly generational player. And so they take Victor Wembanyama, no brainer in that year. Then the following year in 2024, they win only 22 games once again, get lucky again, get the number 4 pick and take Stephon Castle in a draft that was much weaker. So a lot more credit to them there for taking Castle, who in retrospect looks like he probably should have went number 1 overall, or at least higher than number 4 there, and over guys like Zachary Risacher and Reed Shepherd. And then 2025, they take a little bit of a leap to at least respectability, 34 wins. Popovich is having health issues. He steps down only 5 games into the season. They elevate Mitch Johnson into the head coaching role. And they showed at least enough to this front office that they were convinced to trade for De'Aaron Fox, but they did not empty the cupboard for him in terms of assets. Him and Wemby end up playing less than 5 games together that first year, so we didn't really get to see what it looked like. They gave him that extension, which maybe they regret after the lottery plays out after this year, in which they get very lucky again, get the number 2 overall pick and the luxury of drafting Dylan Harper. They also got Carter Bryant at 14. So they've been on a heater in the draft the past couple of years. They've obviously had some lottery luck, but those guys like Vassell and Johnson are still around. So they've actually built up quite the nice little young core here through the draft. And expectations coming into this year, I think people did expect them to take a pretty big leap here. But when I say pretty big leap, I mean into like 6 or 7 seed territory. This is a team that was 13th in the West last year. They were not really competing for even a play-in spot down the stretch of the season, especially when Wemby was out with the blood clot issue he had. But if they had just been the 6 or 7 seed, lost a hard-fought first-round series, everybody would have been like, wow, what a great season for Spurs. They got their taste of the playoffs. They're probably going to add a piece or two, and they'll take that big leap the next year. But here they are, 62 wins this season, and a huge, huge leap in a way that I don't think anybody could have seen coming, even the most optimistic Spurs fans. And the contrast of how this team was built compared to the Knicks is just pretty funny. Like I said, they built basically this entire team through the draft, excluding De'Aaron Fox. But, De'Aaron Fox in this playoffs has kind of been more of a role player for them anyway, because he's been a little banged up, and they've got such good contributions out of Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle and a lot of the other role guys. And look, their draft, they've had some misses, obviously. Josh Primo at 12th overall in 2021. Sohan's looks like a bust at 9 in 2022. They draft guys like Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley in the first round in 2022. These guys were later picks, so not the end of the world there. But, they still have Keldon Johnson, who they got 29th overall in 2019. Devin Vassell, who they got 11th overall in 2020. And then Wemby in 2023, Castle in 2024, Harper in 2025, next to Carter Bryant, also in that draft. So their entire core, essentially, other than Fox, and then you throw Kornet in there, but obviously he's been playing sparing minutes to this point in the postseason, and it is wildly different from what the Knicks did. But this is more of the way that the NBA is headed, I would say. So it'll be a very nice litmus test in this finals to see which team build methodology wins out. And especially with the restrictions of the second apron and the CBA and all that, it is quite uncommon for the Knicks to do it their way. And the Spurs, people try to do it their way, but it requires some luck and some good drafting. So it will be very interesting to see how that plays out. But okay, we're going to get into the formal preview now. And I'm going to talk about 7 swing factors that I think whoever has the advantage in each of these things in this series is likely to increase their odds to win significantly. So, if one team wins 5 of these 7 things, then I think that that's the team that's probably going to win the title. And so starting off with the first one here is San Antonio's ability to make Jalen Brunson defend and to ultimately turn him into a liability. He has obviously been absolutely elite offensively, not just this postseason, but really since he arrived in New York. But defensively, year over year, he has been a pretty big negative across the board, and not just a guy that's like obviously not a plus defender, but a guy that's like making the team significantly worse on the defensive end of the court when he's out there. The last 3 playoffs, if you just look at those this year in the postseason, they have a 107 defensive rating, which is honestly not that bad when he's on the court, but a 95 defensive rating when he's off the court. So a 12-point swing on defense in terms of efficiency there when he's on versus off. You look at 2025 last season, they were a 117 defensive rating with him on the court, which is not very good, and a 107 defensive rating when he's off the court. So a 10-point swing there when he was off the court. And it was especially glaring in that Pacers series where they were a 123 when he was on the court defensive rating wise and a 105 when he was off. So a massive swing there. And that was a big reason for the series. And they honestly made a lot of their runs when he was off the court because that's when they were finally getting stops. 2024, a little bit of a skewed season for them just because they had so many injuries that Brunson was honestly barely even coming out of the game. So when he was off the court, they didn't have a huge sample size, and also they had no OG Anunoby, no Mitchell Robinson. So the defense was way worse across the board. So it does not hold up in 2024. But then even going back to 2023, a 110 defensive rating when he's on the court, a 98 defensive rating when he was off the court. And if you look at the Heat series when they lost, again, very glaring. 116 defensive rating when he was on the court, a 90 defensive rating when he was off the court. So 3 of the last 4 postseasons for Brunson in New York, the team has been 10 or more points better defensively when he has been off the court. So yes, they obviously are better offensively when he's out there, but 10 points is a huge, huge swing. And the teams that have consistently put him in action and made him defend have had the greatest success against the Knicks, and the series they've lost are the ones where this has been the most glaring. And at its most extreme, like last year against Indiana, his defense was so negative that I personally thought watching it, it almost outweighed how great he was offensively to make him at the very least a neutralized player, but in some games, almost like a negative out there. And especially in a matchup like San Antonio, where Wemby, if he can impact Brunson's efficiency, even just a tick where he's no longer a average or above average efficiency guy to an average but slightly below average efficiency guy, which I think is a reasonable thing to think that could happen given what Wembanyama just did to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the conference finals, then his defensive shortcomings, if they try to attack that, could really turn him into a negative player overall, depending on how severe it ends up being. So I will say that New York has done a better job of quote unquote hiding him defensively in this postseason than in years past. And again, this year, there's still a 107 defensive rating when he's been on the court, which is a good, respectable defense across the board, but it's obviously not elite or anything like that, like the 95 when he's been off. But if I am the Spurs, and I think the most likely scenario from a matchup perspective is they're probably going to put Brunson on either Vassell or Champagny when he's out there on defense and all the starters are out there. So to me, they should be heavy utilizing Vassell and Champagny as screeners on the ball handler when they're on offense to try to get Brunson to guard Stephon Castle, to guard De'Aaron Fox, to guard even Dylan Harper, because those three guys can really take advantage of this. And the thing with Brunson is for a guy like Fox, that's going to be a tough matchup for him because the speed. A guy like Castle, that's going to be a tough matchup for him because the bully ball and strength that he plays with getting to the basket. And then Harper's honestly got a little bit of both. So that's going to be really tough. And I think that if they make Brunson have to play defense consistently to the point where they're spamming matchups to get him in the action time and time again, then I think that's going to bring out the best version of the Spurs offense. And I think it's going to bring out the worst version of Brunson. None of this is even to mention that, you know, the more he has to compete defensively, the less energy he might have on the offensive end. So we've seen teams kind of not do this that much during this postseason, but I think if you're San Antonio, this has to be a really high priority. And if they can make him work on that end of the court and turn him into a liability, because when he's in this action time and time again, he truly does become a liability on that end of the court, then I think you can neutralize him a bit, and that's going to be a huge advantage for San Antonio. And conversely, if the Knicks are able to hide him and they don't have to worry about him being in the action consistently, then I think that's going to be a huge advantage for the Knicks. The second swing factor that I have for this series is Mitchell Robinson's health and his ability to be his normal self. It was reported earlier this week that he broke his pinky, not even playing basketball, but just at his home, and that he is going to try to play through it. So he's not officially been cleared. It's not been formally announced that he's definitely playing in game one. So this factor to me is about one, does he even play at all? And two, how good can he be when he does play? But to me, even for a guy in this playoffs that's only averaged 5 points and 6 rebounds a game, I think his presence in this series specifically is immensely important. And I know it might sound hyperbolic to say that a role player that's 14 minutes per game in the postseason this far is this important, but I really think that he's one of the most important players for New York in the series because they don't have a single other guy that can replicate the things that he does. His offensive rebounding is elite and one of the best in the league, not to mention his defensive rebounding as well, but is specifically what he brings on the offensive glass. Sure, Cat can do some of that. Josh Hart can do some of that, but not at the consistent rate that Robinson does and how much just he is consistently active on the glass there. His rim protection, they genuinely don't have anybody else on this roster that can bring what he brings there. Like Cat is just not that, and they don't really have another big that they can trust or be reliable there. What he is as a lob threat, they also don't really have anybody that can replicate that. Cat's more of a below the rim guy, and they just don't have another big that plays. And his general just size, length, girth to be a body that can throw at Wemby, for example, for a lot of these matchups. We just saw the Thunder put Hartenstein on Wemby, and that was sort of the best matchup they had for him because offensively, he just lives at the rim when he's got smaller guys on him as opposed to these bigger guys. He tends to float out to the perimeter more, which that's a win for any team playing the Spurs. And I think, honestly, of all the things that Robinson brings, I think the offensive rebounding is the biggest thing here because it is a massive counter to what Wemby does as a help defender. When Mitchell Robinson's in the game, Wembanyama is probably going to guard him, and he's going to just camp out in the paint and leave Robinson kind of alone in that dunker spot. And then anybody that drives even close to the paint, Wemby's going to be there as that help defender to, send to at the ball or help last minute. And with his wingspan and length, he can get a hand on most things or even deter guys from shooting it in the first place. But when he does that, that means Mitchell Robinson is going to be sitting there at the rim, ready to get offensive boards for this team. And him generating extra possessions here, it may make Wemby stay at home more. It may force him to say, this guy's coming at me at the basket, but I know if I leave him, he's either going to throw it up for the lob or Mitchell Robinson's going to be right there to clean the glass behind me for 2 easy points. So I think this will open up the paint a ton in the mid-range a little bit for these guys to operate more if Mitchell Robinson is out there as an offensive rebounding threat and kind of forces Wemby's hand to stick a little closer to or when shots go up rather than just completely selling out and going at every shot to try to block it. And obviously if he doesn't play or is played out of this series, then that's a huge issue here because that basically puts Karl Anthony Towns as the only reliable big that they have. And I don't see him being that same sort of threat as an offensive rebounder because he wants to be more on the perimeter anyway. And then defensively, we just know that him full-time as a center is just not a winning formula on the defensive end of the court. They basically have zero rim protection for 3 elite downhill guards plus Wemby in the paint. And if he plays but isn't his normal self, then his limitations may make him just unplayable anyway. His free throw shooting has been so abysmal. It's hard to imagine it could get much worse even with the injury, but it's very possible that it does. And between that and clogging the paint a little bit offensively where Wemby can camp out, he might just become not a very effective player if he's not able to do anything with the ball or if he's worse from the free throw line and he's been played out of some of these games with the hack of Robinson that they do. But I just think the things that he brings are so important. And even if it's just for 15 minutes a game when Cat's not in the game, maybe even sometimes with Cat, but guarding Wemby, getting offensive rebounds, being a rim protector, a lob threat for this team, somebody with size, I just think they need that. And they don't have it if he's not out there. And so his health, when I saw that report, it genuinely changed my opinion on the Knicks and their ability to win this series. I thought that they went from having a really, really good chance to basically no chance if he didn't play. But then the report came out that he's probably going to be able to play through it. So I kind of backtracked a little bit on that. But the point is, for a guy as inconsequential statistically as Mitchell Robinson, I think he is an absolute X factor in this series and very, very important to how it plays out. The next swing factor I have is Josh Hart's ability to force San Antonio to guard him, whether that be from making shots or being active enough to have a guy on him. So Josh Hart is going to be wide open in the series. Victor Wembanyama is likely to be the matchup for him, and he's going to cheat off him, probably camp out in the paint. They're going to live with him shooting corner threes. And if he's not making those shots, he will quickly become pretty unplayable in this series. And the Knicks have tried to counter this by making him a heavy screener to get the big involved in the pick and roll anyways, and basically kind of play Josh Hart like a big offensively so that him just camped out in the corner isn't a scenario they have to deal with. And Hart's one game against the Spurs this season. I normally don't read too much into regular season because you got guys like Diawara, Kolek that were playing. Harrison Barnes was starting back then. Wemby in a couple of these matchups wasn't even playing more than 20 minutes a game and was coming off the bench. But the one game Hart did play against the Spurs this season, it was the most ball screens he's ever set in a game. So this is something that they tried to counter with, and in that game the Knicks did win, but I don't know how sustainable that's going to be. And so I do think Hart is just going to need to make some shots in this series. And I think even if he does make shots, there's a chance that the Spurs basically say, that's fine, let's see you do it again. Like he could have a game similar to what he had game 2 against Cleveland. But if the next game he's not making them, then I think they're going to play the law of averages here. And he did shoot 41% from three this year, but overall in the playoffs this year, he's 30.3%. For his career, he's 34.1%. And on the season, when Josh Hart hits 3 or more 3-pointers, including the postseason, they are 15-2. This year, when he shoots at least 5 of them and makes less than 40% of those, in the regular season, they were 4-4. And in the postseason, in those instances, they're 4-1. But the Knicks have barely lost, so it's kind of hard to put too much into that record. But those 5 games include one of their 2 losses to the Hawks, game 1 against Cleveland when they barely squeaked it out in OT, and Josh Hart was benched a minus 23 in a game that they won by double digits. So obviously he was part of the reason that they were even in that deficit in the first place. And then the one other close game that they had against the 76ers in game 2. So they're 4-1 in those games, but obviously those were some of the tougher, closer games that they did have. And again, 4-4 in those instances during the regular season. And so if he does not make shots, there obviously is the counter by Mike Brown that maybe they move him out of the starting lineup. Maybe they try to stagger his minutes where Wemby is not out there, and they put McBride or Shamet in there as a spacer, which worked for them against Cleveland in game 1, for example. And Shamet hit some big shots, and the 5 out really made them tough to guard. But they do concede some things of that. They're going to lose a little bit of defense. They're going to lose some rebounding. Hart's a very good transition player as well, so they're going to lose some of that. Ultimately, I trust Mike Brown to read the series a little bit and see if it's worth taking him out or not. But I do think the Spurs are going to force his hand here, and it's going to come down to whether Hart makes shots. And look, if he ends up shooting 40% from 3 in this series, I think the Knicks got a really, really good shot to win. But if he's having a bunch of 1-for-5, 1-for-6 games from deep, then the Spurs are just going to keep playing off him, and Wemby is going to continue to camp out in the paint, and it's going to make it really difficult for New York to score in the half court because they're basically going to be playing 5-on-4. It's going to feel like a lot of what we saw out of the Pistons throughout this postseason with Oscar Thompson when people were putting centers on him and not really guarding him. And we know that the Spurs are definitely going to do this because the one game Hart did play against them in the regular season, he was 1-for-6 from 3. So he got a lot of threes up comparatively for what he typically shoots and was 4-for-14 overall. And even though they got him involved in a lot of screen actions, he was a 0 plus minus in 29 minutes in a game that they won by 25. So they were plus 25 when he was off the court in 19 minutes and a 0 in 29 minutes. So obviously when he was out there, it was not as easy for them offensively. And when he was off the court and they had more shooting and more spacing, that was when they were able to take advantage. And again, the Knicks have not had issues with this, obviously, to this point. But look, they played Okongwu in the first round, who's very undersized and not exactly a defensive monster down low. They played a compromised Embiid in the second round, who just looked slow as hell on defense, and they were going at him. And I just not close to the type of rim protector that Wembanyama is, at least in his current state. And then Jared Allen in the conference finals, who pretty solid defensively, but still obviously not the rim protector that Wembanyama is. So sure, you can say as a Knicks fan, well, teams have tried this and it hasn't really worked. But I just think the San Antonio matchup is unique in that Wembanyama is not your typical rim protector. He is a guy that made Shea look like an inefficient scorer that only had a mid-range shot in his bag. Like, he is a whole different animal. And if he's the guy that's able to camp out in the paint, like you're not going to score in the half court very much. So Josh Hart's going to need to make shots. And if he's not, they're going to need to pivot off him. So how much he makes San Antonio guard him is going to be a big factor here. The next swing factor I have is whether we get a good Karl Anthony Towns or a bad Karl Anthony Towns. And I know that sounds maybe oversimplified to say, oh yeah, if one of the 2 best players on the team plays well, then they're going to have a better chance of winning. But I think it is particularly relevant and true for Karl Anthony Towns in this series, just because of 1, his playoff history, and 2, his role and what he does in this matchup. So Cat is going to have 2 possible scenarios for his matchup, which both will offer unique opportunities for him to capitalize. Option 1 is They'll put Wemby on Josh Hart, like I mentioned, and they're going to have either Champagnie or Vassell on him. Could be Castle, maybe, but I personally think that they're probably going to put Castle on Brunson. So probably either Champagnie or Vassell will guard him. And in these matchups, he will have a sizable height and strength advantage. And so he should, in theory, be able to kill these guys in the posts and force doubles and open up shooters. And it should be easy for him to do a lot of what he's been doing as a playmaker in the high post. And he can shoot over these guys with little resistance. And so those should be, in theory, matchups he can feast on with those smaller guys. The other option is they put Wembanyama on him if they either move off a Hart or decide that that's not the route they want to go. And in this scenario, offensively, he will be in a position to pull Wembanyama away from the basket, which will open up the paint for the rest of the team, open up the mid-range for the rest of the team. And he is that unique type of big who can match Wemby's mobility, but also has the strength advantage on Wemby. So he should be able to take him off the dribble aside from just pulling him out of the paint. So regardless of what the matchup ends up being on Towns, I think he is the mismatch of this series and is the perfect offensive player to break the Spurs and the Wemby cheat code of what they have on their defense. Like, the more he has the ball, the more it'll force the Spurs and Mitch Johnson to make tougher decisions. Do they put Wemby on him to try to play him straight up, but then have the risk of him being pulled away from the basket and opening up the paint? Or do they put these smaller guys on him and have a really advantageous matchup for him on the offensive end of the court to be able to score and also work more out of that high post? These are the questions that Mitch Johnson's going to have to answer, and it's going to put him in a tough spot where he is going to have to move some pieces around to make this happen. And so for me, Karl-Anthony Towns needs to continue to be methodical about attacking his mismatches to maintain his good decision-making, no dumb fouls, no foul trouble, no dumb turnovers. He needs to compete defensively so he doesn't become a liability on that end, and he needs to play the all-around complete game that he's been playing in this postseason so far. And he's been spectacular. I talked about it on my last pod. I talked on Nick Wallace's podcast. Like, Cat has been, to me, the number one reason the Knicks are in this position. I think he's playing the best basketball of his career, but he needs to continue to do this because if he falls into bad habits, then Mitch Johnson's not going to be forced to have to make these decisions because Cat's going to make it easy for them. And so, like, if you just look at the 5 series that Towns has lost in his career, he's had 56 assists to 80 turnovers and more turnovers than assists in 4 out of those 5 series. He shot 31.7% from 3 overall. He has 116 defensive rating in those series. And if you look at the series that he's won, he has 126 assists to 81 turnovers, more assists and turnovers in 6 out of 7 series, shooting 42.4% from 3 and a 105 defensive rating. So when he competes defensively, makes his shots outside, takes care of the ball, is effective as a playmaker, like, they win the series more often than not. And so if he's making his classic Karl-Anthony Towns mistakes, then I don't think it's really going to matter who the matchup for Cat is because he's going to just be doing things that are actively helping the Spurs consistently. But if he is his best version of himself and is able to pull Wemby out of the paint or take advantage of smaller mismatches, then it's just going to put the Spurs in a really tough spot where they've got to make tough decisions. The next swing factor I have is winning, or in the Spurs case, surviving the Luke Kornet minutes. And Luke Kornet is a fine player. He's not a bad player by any means, but it's been a pretty rough postseason for him across the board here. So overall, against Oklahoma City, Luke Kornet had a negative 24.2 net rating. And comparatively, they were a plus 10.7 with him off the court. They allowed a 123.6 defensive rating when he was on the court compared to 102.4 when he was off. They were a minus 38 plus minus in 73 minutes across those games and a plus 62 in the rest of the minutes. Kornet's plus minus in wins in that series, they were a minus 4 in 42 minutes in the 4 wins with a minus 5.3 net rating, 99 offensive rating, and a 104 defensive rating. So they were still losing his minutes, but they were at least competing, and, minus 5 net rating isn't awful for that small of a sample. In the losses, he was a minus 34 in 31 minutes which is a minus 51.5 net rating. And that's good for a 100 offensive rating. So basically the same offensive rating with him in the wins and losses, but a 151.5 defensive rating. So the defense just fell off a cliff when he was out there in the losses in this last series that they just played. And so for San Antonio, if they survive the Kornet minutes, they're probably going to win the Wemby minutes more often than not, just because of the level of impact that he has. So as long as they're not getting demolished when Wemby's off the court, they should be okay. But they did get demolished 3 separate times, and those are the 3 games that Oklahoma City won in the last series. And so the question becomes, if they cannot survive those minutes, does Mitch Johnson eventually abandon Luke Kornet if he's not out there surviving? That probably won't be tenable in the minutes with Mitchell Robinson because he'll just destroy them on the glass. But I do wonder, when Cat is out there at the 5 and Wemby's not out there, would they consider playing Keldon Johnson or Carter Bryant at the 5 and go a little smaller? Because I do think Carter probably could hold his own against Cat for stints, and maybe even Harrison Barnes gets in the mix here and you use him as a small ball 5, which he's done plenty in the past. And, they've done this a little bit in the regular season. It was a small sample. They were a minus 4.6 net rating in those scenarios during the regular season. But I think the Knicks are the type of team, if Robinson's not out there, that they could probably get away with it. So that'll be something to consider as well. But if the Knicks are absolutely dominating the Kornet minutes like Oklahoma City did, I mean, Shea looked absolutely like he was licking his lips whenever he wasn't in the game out there, then that's going to be a big determining factor here. And if the Spurs can survive these, then they're going to be in a good spot. The next swing factor we have here is the Knicks' willingness to play fast and get out and run. Over the last 6 seasons for New York, they've been one of the slower paced teams in the NBA. 2021, they were dead last in pace. 2022, they were 29th. 2023, they were 25th. 2024, they were 30th, dead last. 2025, they were 26th. And this season, they were 27th. In the playoffs, they are 7th out of 16. But the playoffs tend to just slow down a little bit. So they actually have a slower pace right now in the playoffs than they did in the regular season, despite the fact that they're actually ranking higher than they were. And in general, for transition frequency in the regular season, they had the 16th most. So pretty middle of the pack there. They're 5th highest in the playoffs. But again, same thing where they're actually doing it at less of a rate in the postseason, just because in general, there's less transition. But they've been dominant in the postseason when they have gotten out and run. They have 139 offensive rating in transition. That is 2nd in the playoffs. They also have the number 1 half-court offense at 106.1 in the playoffs. They were 7th there in the regular season. But again, I just want to emphasize, they're playing a different animal here. The Spurs defense is allowing only an 86.3 defensive rating in the half-court. That's first in the NBA. Like, the Knicks are not going to score 106 points per 100 possession in the half court in the series. It's just not going to happen. And I think it's going to be a hell of a lot closer to that 86 number that the Spurs have been allowing. And they were 94.9 in the half court on defense in the regular season, which was still 4th. And so the Spurs are an absolute juggernaut in the half court defensively, like just impossible to score on with how good Wemby is there and the things he can take away from a team. We just saw it with Oklahoma City. We just saw it with Shea and his massive hit and efficiency that he took in that series. So the more the Knicks can get out and run, the better. They have good transition players in Bridges and Anunoby. Hart is a good transition guy. Brunson tends to want to slow things down a little bit, but I think he needs to be a little bit more willing to push the pace, even if that's just passing the ball up to the wings to get downhill a little bit more. Because the Spurs, for as good as they've been defensively in the half court, in transition, they have a 122.5 defensive rating allowed in this postseason, which is 12th in the playoffs out of 16 teams. So they have not been as good there. They were still very good there in the regular season. They were 4th ranked, but in the postseason, for whatever reason, they've just allowed a little bit more of that. I think part of that is probably because they're turning the ball over a little bit more than they were during the regular season. But like, just look at the last series. OKC, to me, their biggest downfall was their lack of creation in the half court. Obviously, injuries played a part, in my opinion, with J-Dub, but it's also just due to the Wemby effect. They spent 81.6% of their possessions in the half court. Like 4 out of 5 times they were having to play that 86 defensive rating defense in the half court. Like, to me, you should be trying to avoid those scenarios as much as humanly possible. And so if you're the Knicks, even if it's going to make Brunson and Cat, who are more prototypical half-court players, a little uncomfortable, and take a page out of Indiana's book from last year and just continue to push the pace, because the Spurs are going to want to do this. They play at a much faster clip than the Knicks do generally. So I think they need to lean into this. They were super efficient in transition against Cleveland, and they have been throughout the whole postseason. It's just a matter of if they're going to make a concerted effort to continue to do that. And I just think if you can limit the half-court possessions against Wembanyama, you have to do it. And lastly, the last swing factor we have here is the corner three battle between the two teams, which, again, this is another one that probably sounds pretty obvious or simple. Like, yeah, of course, if a team makes more corner threes than the other team, they're probably going to have an upper hand here. But coincidentally enough, these are the two teams that shot the most corner three-pointers in the NBA during the regular season this year. Both were at 12.9% of their shots. Both also allow a decent amount. The Knicks allowed the second most at 11.8, and the Spurs allowed the 10th most. So that just means that these teams want to take those kind of shots a lot, and these teams are okay allowing those kinds of shots a lot. So I think there's a high probability we get a lot of these shots in this series. They both make them at a pretty healthy clip. The Knicks are sixth at 41.6% of their shots made there. The Spurs eighth at 39.7%. The Spurs opponents actually shot the worst of anybody from the corner in the regular season, 34.5%. So that's a pretty damn low number there, which makes some sense just because of Wembanyama and how good their defense is, as I've continued to say. But that's a big discrepancy that they've had, and it's been an advantage for them throughout the season. So if the Knicks can counteract that and make more of these shots, that's going to be a big upper hand. And if you just look in the playoffs, these are the top two teams this postseason in terms of percentage of shots allowed out of the corner. The Knicks have allowed 11.6%. The Spurs have allowed 12%. That's the top two teams. So again, we're going to see a lot of these shots. The Knicks have shot way better from the corner in the postseason, 42%. The Spurs are actually only 15th out of 16 playoff teams at 30.9%. So they've not shot it well there. And they've been able to win without that. So again, I think this is probably a factor that's more important for the Knicks. If the Spurs and Knicks are playing even here in terms of the shooting percentage from the corner, that's not going to bode well for the Knicks, because this has been a big advantage for them. And the Spurs have at least proven in this postseason they can win without winning this. But this is where the swing guys are going to be so important. The Devin Vassell's of the world, the Julian Champagnes of the world, the Keldon Johnsons, even maybe the Matt Barnes and Carter Bryants could win a game if they're hitting shots from you there. For the Knicks, the Mikal Bridges, the OG Anunobies, the Josh Harts, which I've already talked about, but even the McBrides and the Shamits of the world. Like, if we look at these stats at the end of the series and see that Shamet shot 45%, McBride shot 42%, and OG shot 50% from three, pretty good chance the Knicks had a huge advantage on that front and are in a really good spot to win, versus if Vassell and Champagnie just light it up from the corner, and then you've got to cheat off of some of the guards, and then they've got one-on-one matchups and can find Wembanyama down low, et cetera. It's all a trickle-down effect of, like, the more shots you make there, the more you've got to try to defend it, the more you're going to allow other things on the court. Or maybe you just say, hey, you're going to keep making that and beat us, then all power to you. And if that's the case, then obviously that's going to decide the series too. So the corner three battle, just because these teams allow a lot of corner threes, because they both shoot a lot of corner threes, I think it's going to be highly relevant here. And whoever makes a higher clip here and maybe takes more here is going to have an advantage. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about what's on the line for these teams. If the Knicks and the Spurs win, what does that mean for them? If they lose, what does that mean for them? I'm going to start with the Knicks. A Knicks victory here. First of all, the fans would just go absolutely berserk, and New York would be an absolute madhouse with how insane they are, even just winning first-round games against the Hawks in a series they lost. Like, imagine if they actually win this thing. The tickets are like $4,000 just to get in. But the number one thing here to me is that Brunson will disprove all of the non-believers, the Becky Hammonds of the world who said that he can't beat the number one guy on a championship level team, proves that a small guard can actually be the best player on a title team. Not just him, but that proof of concept does exist. And Steph's really the only guy this century that you can think of as sort of a quote unquote smaller guy that was like the guy on the team where they won, but he obviously had lot of help in some of the years with KD, et cetera. And Steph's a top 10 player all time, most likely. But again, it would prove that if you surround that player with the ideal roster around him, you can get it done. Obviously, you need a good fit around him. He's not going to transcend or carry a subpar roster to this point just because of the shortcomings that inherently come with being a small guard. But in the right scenario, he can do it, and he's proving that other guards could too if they're at his level. So it also opens the conversation for a couple other things. Is he perhaps the best free agent signing ever? When you just look at the dollars it costs to get him and the kind of smarts to take a shot on him. Like, obviously you could say LeBron James is the best free agent signing ever, but it's like anybody in the league would have signed him if they could. Brunson, I don't think every team was giving him that kind of money. And there was probably a handful of teams that just weren't even interested in him at all. So from that part of it, I think that is certainly he's in the conversation there. And then, is he the best Knick of all time? I think that's a real conversation as well. Walt Frazier did win 2 rings back in the 70s. Patrick Ewing was around so long and had so many good seasons, probably a better individual prime and longevity with the Knicks than Frazier did. Those are pretty obviously the top 2 guys for the team right now, but it's hard to argue. If Brunson brings home a championship to New York, and for all that Ewing did, like, he never could get over the hump. The closest they came was the year that he was injured, and he was late into his 30s anyway, hence the coining of the Ewing theory. But it's a real question. And I think Brunson's got a real case. I think he probably needs to play some more years, but if he plays 7-8 years with the Knicks, gets a championship in this day and age of the NBA, then I think there's a real conversation to be had there. I think he probably passes Ewing. Frazier could be up for debate because of the 2 rings, but I think a ring now just means more than back then. That was pre-merger, so the league was a lot smaller. It was less popular. So I think there's a real argument to be made that he could be the greatest Knick of all time if he did pull this off. Another thing that a win for the Knicks would certainly impact is the view on the Mikal Bridges trade. It would 100% justify it. I was critical of what they gave up when the deal went down. I have since talked about how it was a massive overpay and ultimately, in my opinion, a bad trade. I know they had to trade those picks to even convince Brooklyn to trade him when they didn't have their pick and they didn't really want to bottom out. And so they were going to have to be extra convinced to move off of Bridges, especially to trade to your in-town rival. But look, he's not worth 5 picks and a swap. He's just not. And he's a good player, but not sniffing all-star level. And ultimately, he's a role player, a very good role player. But trading that kind of draft capital for a role player is typically not good business. But I'll say this. If they get a ring just 2 years after this deal and he's a huge part of it, then I can't argue with it. I'm sorry. Like, if you make a deal like that and you win a championship and the guy you traded for is a huge contributor, then it's justified. That's the ultimate goal, is winning a championship. And so it paid off, and I will no longer criticize it, because when you finally do get that ring, it is the vindication for these types of moves, and anything else beyond this year would just be the icing on the cake for Mikal on this team. I also think a win here would make the Wolves and Raptors look pretty awful for the OG and Karl Anthony Towns trades. I think they already look pretty bad right now, but again, people were defending the Wolves as recently as like last year, saying that it was at least an even trade, but some people were saying the Wolves won the trade and that they were smart to get off of Karl Anthony Towns, and that Randall's had been just as impactful for them. And I think this season we saw the high contrast between these two guys, and Randall crumbled in the postseason. Cat has been phenomenal. For all of his flaws, the upside was always higher than Randall's. And at his best, he truly is an elite level player. And I think he's a top 20 guy in the league right now. And so to flip him for Randall and 1 pick and DiVincenzo, this would make it no longer a conversation that the Knicks absolutely won this trade. And then for OG Anunoby, like RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, no first round pick, like that already looks like a terrible trade, but this would just obviously be the nail in the coffin on that one. And those two teams just probably going to look back and think, man, we either shouldn't have made those deals or we should have tried to get more for those guys. And then Mike Brown. I think this would be a huge legacy builder for him here. He would climb up the ranks of the modern NBA coaches. He would have coached 12 seasons in the NBA, 10 full seasons. 2 of his years, he was fired midseason, one after 5 games, one after 31 games, so pretty early both times. So even if we include those 2 years he was fired, he's got a 60.4 win percentage. That's a 50 win pace over those 12 years. He's had a 55% win percentage at all 4 of the places overall that he's been at. Among guys with at least 10 years of experience as a coach, he is actually already 7th all time in terms of win percentage, which is highly impressive. In the playoffs, he has a 596 win percentage, which is also 7th all time for guys with at least a decade of coaching experience. So he's been a playoff winner. You look at a guy like Tibbs, for example, they just fired, has a below 500 record in the postseason. And if they did win this series, he would be up to 17th all time in terms of playoff wins already. And again, he's only had 10 full seasons coaching. So that's crazy impressive. He's a 2-time coach of the year. 9 of his 10 full seasons, he had 45 or more wins. 6 of his 10 full seasons, he had 50 plus wins. He has 2 finals appearances and he would have 1 championship. He maybe the greatest feat of all, took the Kings to their only 2 winning seasons of the last 20 seasons. Not to mention that as a lead assistant for the Warriors, he has 3 rings in 2017, 2018, and 2022. He also coached the Warriors as the stand-in head coach in the playoffs when Steve Kerr had injuries in the past. So it'd be hard to argue with this kind of resume, and it's kind of weird he's been out of the contention for a head coach with these kind of numbers. And if he gets the ring, then he's probably headed to the Hall of Fame if he gets a ring, seriously, with these kind of numbers. And I know he's only had 10 full seasons, not a huge sample, but like he's just been productive everywhere he's been. And I think he's been a huge part of what has turned this team around. And as I talked about on my previous podcast. So the last thing for the Knicks, if they win, a huge win for roster construction through trades and free agency. I talked about this at the top of the pod, but it shows that it can be done. If you make savvy trades and sign non-star free agents, there's still a path to contend and be really, really good. You just got to find the right deals, obviously. And it's even more particularly impressive just given the current state of the salary cap and the CBA and the landscape of the league. So if they did pull this off, I don't know how many teams would try to quote unquote replicate it just because it's really hard to do, but it might give teams some hope that don't have draft picks like the Phoenix Suns or the Milwaukee Bucks or some of these other teams, the Brooklyn Nets that have traded away a lot of their future picks. Like there are still moves to be made and you can get to that point even if you can't build through the draft. With a loss for the Knicks, it's kind of weird because despite the fact that they're kind of all in, it doesn't feel like it would be the end of the world if they lost. Like they're underdogs right now. They're plus 155 in terms of betting odds for the series right now. The Spurs are favorites. And I think even making the finals kind of just feels like a huge success for them. Like no one really expected them to be here. I did pick them in the finals, so I'll take my credit for that. But they were not the consensus pick. Most people did not believe in them, even going into the postseason with the limitations for most of the other Eastern Conference teams. And even me who picked them in the finals, like I never would have thought they had a chance to win this series. Like if you told me before the postseason they're going to play San Antonio or Oklahoma City, I would have said it probably 5-game series at best. Like I thought that they were going to get mopped a little bit, but with how they're playing, they definitely have a chance. And I just kind of feel like their fans just feel grateful to even be in the spot. Like I don't think any fan's going to look back on this team and have anything but fond memories and highly regard them and just absolutely love them. Even if they get swept, I still think Knicks fans are going to be talking about this Knicks team 5-10 years from now, maybe even longer beyond that. And so I don't feel like it's super consequential if they lose, but I will say this is their best chance. They're going to be good next year, but the other East teams will be back. You know, Boston's probably going to retool. Indiana's going to have Halliburton back, and they should be relevant again. Orlando got a new coach, so we'll see if that changes anything. Detroit will probably make a move for a shooter or a scorer. Giannis is probably going to be on a new team. Miami seems like the favorite there. Atlanta, Charlotte, there's some other young teams with assets and young talent that could be interested. Even Washington could be somewhat interesting next season. So getting back to the finals is really, really, really hard, as we've seen. We haven't had a repeat team make the finals consecutive years since the Warriors back when they had Kevin Durant. And this team is going to get very expensive moving forward. and it's going to be increasingly hard to maintain this group, and they're probably going to have to move off from guys in a couple seasons. So realistically, it kind of is just a 2-year window or something like that. And all their guys are 28 or older. They're core. So how many years until Brunson as a small guard and all the wear and tear and the playoff mileage starts to add up? So it's a real possibility they do not make it back to this stage if they don't win it this season. But I say all that and still think that I won't say they're totally playing with house money, but like it's not a shameful loss to lose to Wemby and the Spurs as underdogs in this series. And the Spurs have the best player in the series. They have the better defense. You could argue in some aspects they're the deeper team. Like I don't think anyone's going to fault them if they lose this series, and I don't think fans are going to feel overly disappointed, but more just like happy that they were along for the ride. So it does feel weird saying that for a team that is, again, quote unquote, all in. But I think this is more of a unique scenario because they kind of exceeded expectations. They're all in, but they weren't viewed as some consensus contender. On the Spurs side for this, if they were to win, then it certainly changes the landscape of how we talk about them, how we talk about Victor Wembanyama and his stature in the league. And there's a real argument to be made that he becomes the best player in the world. And I think the only thing really holding him back would be the sustained body of work. He's still only a 2-time All-Star, a 1-time All-NBA player. Shea and Jokic, the other two guys in contention, they both have a ring. So it'd be 1-1-1 across the board there. If we look at MVPs, Shea has 2, Jokic has 3, Wemby would have 0. The offensive efficiency and consistency stuff, like the counting stats, the percentages, Wemby's are lower than Shea and Jokic across the board. The advanced stats still highly prefer Shea and Jokic. They both have higher true shooting percentage, PER, win shares, offensive win shares, box plus minus, net rating, offensive rating, etc. But there's still a lot of arguments to be made for him if he does pull this off. Eye test wise and impact wise, you could argue that he's already there, even regardless of the result. But he would have beaten Shea head to head on this run. By age 22, he would have had a 62-win season, a first-team All-NBA, Defensive Player of the Year, a championship, and likely a Finals MVP if they win. And so really the only thing missing there would be a little bit of improvement on some stats and the MVP piece, which I do think is slightly relevant to say that a guy that hasn't won an MVP and other guys that are still in the prime that have won multiple, that is somewhat relevant. But I don't think anyone thinks that he's not going to get one. And I'm sure there's some voters right now who are having remorse having not voted for him, at least as second place, because he did finish third this year. So the other thing is, how can you really penalize him he's only been in the league 3 years. So it's like, yeah, he doesn't have the same number of accolades or anything like that, but how could he? Even if he was a first team All-NBA guy every year of his career, he'd still have significantly less than Shea and Jokic because he'd only have 3. He's only been in the league 3 years. So that's a little bit unfair. So again, I can't say for certain how I would rank him if he wins this. I might have him as the best player. I want to see how it plays out and think about it a little more and actually experience it before I would just say that I will do that. But I think it's highly likely if they win it, he would be, I won't say consensus, but I bet more people than not would have him as at the number 1 spot. But regardless of just his standing right now, this also would be putting him in pretty uncharted territory with some of the all-time greats. I talked about guys in my previous pod who had made the finals at 22 or younger as an All-NBA player or in their third season or earlier as an All-NBA player. But if you refine that to say guys that have won the finals at 22 or younger, that would just be Kobe, Duncan, and Magic. Those are the only 3 guys. Kobe had Shaq, a top 10 player all time. Tim Duncan had David Robinson, who's probably top 20, 25 guy all time. And Magic Johnson had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a top 5 player of all time. So they all had significant help. If you look at guys who have in their third season or earlier accomplished that, so won a championship as an All-NBA guy in their third season or earlier. Jalen Williams last year, actually, but obviously had Shea on his team. D-Wade, but he had Shaq on his team. Larry Bird and Bill Walton. So if you look at guys that have done it solo, no other All-NBA guys on the team in their prime and accomplished winning the title by either their third season or being 22 or younger, it is Bird, Walton, and would-be Wemby. Just those 3 guys. And the last time it happened was Bird in 1981. So it will have been 45 years since someone pulled this off as sort of a solo act at this age and this or this early in their career. So that is it, completely unprecedented, obviously. And the question starts to become, how many rings is he going to get, rather than can he get over the hump? And he's got massive runway to make it happen. And whether it's 2, 3, 4, like I don't know. I won't speculate there, because I know we've said that about a lot of guys and a lot of teams, and then it's harder to get back than we think. But I mean, he's an outlier, clearly, based on this stat. Like, it's absurd what he would be doing at this age. And it feels like nothing's off the table for him. I'm not even going to like remotely talk about goat talk or anything like that, just because he's 3 years into his career and he could have a knee injury and, be out of the league before 30 or something like that. Obviously don't anticipate that necessarily, but I'm just saying, like, he's a long, 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 long way away from that. But he is checking the boxes that if eventually he was going to go on to become this, these are the types of things that he would be doing right now. And so it's at least getting that ball rolling a little bit for down the road conversations. Another guy I want to talk about is Dylan Harper. You could argue that this would be the second best rookie playoff run ever since the merger. Magic Johnson obviously was the guy when he won his rookie year. 18 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, and a ring as a rookie. So, like, going to be pretty hard to beat that. I'm not sure anybody ever will. But there's only been one other rookie besides Magic to ever even average 10 points per game on a championship run, and that was Johnny Davis for the Blazers back in 1977. And there's only been 3 other guys to hit 8 points per game: Manu Ginobili in 03, Sam Cassell in 94, and Kevin McHale in 81. But, Manu shot 39% from the field. Cassell shot 39% from the field. Like, those guys were scoring a little, but were not super efficient. Harper's averaging 13, 5, and 3 on 53% as a guard, 36% from 3 and 85% from the line. So I think that you'd pretty much consensus have to say that outside of Magic Johnson, this would be the best rookie run for a finals team since the merger. Then just overall, this Spurs team, they are only going to get better from now. And if they win the title this season, it really opens the door for them to continue to be highly dominant for the next 5 to 10 seasons, maybe even beyond that. I mean, who knows? But their young core, Wemby's only 22, Castle's 21, Harper's 20, Vassell's 25, Champagne's 24, Keldon Johnson's 26, Carter Bryant's only 20, even De'Aaron Fox is only 28. Like, I know he's like the veteran on the team, but it's not, he's still multiple years away from his 30s. On top of that, how young those guys are. They have the 20th pick in this draft and the 35th pick in this draft. They own all of their picks moving forward, except for the 2027 pick that they have going out. But on top of all their picks, they have a 2027 pick coming in from the Hawks from the DeJounte Murray trade. They have a 2028 swap with Boston. They have a 2030 swap with the better of a pick between the Wolves and Dallas, which that could be a pretty juicy pick there. And a very juicy pick is a swap with Sacramento in 2031. So they have up to 4 tradable first-round picks and 3 swaps after the draft this year that they have at their disposal to potentially make trades, but they don't even need to make trades. They could just use these picks and continue to draft really good players. And on top of that, their cap sheet looks very clean, at least for now. They're projected to be $47 million below the tax in this offseason. They still have Wemby with 1 more year in his rookie contract, Castle with 2, Harper and Bryant with 3. Vassell has 3 more years at $27 million. The only quote-unquote bad money you could say they have is the Fox contract at 50 next year, 53, 57, and 61, which, again, a little rich for my taste personally, but they don't have a single other guy making even $30 million on this roster, so you can kind of afford that. And then by the time they need to start paying the Castle, Wemby, Harper crew, then, maybe they've already moved off Fox at that point. But regardless, they're set up extremely, extremely well, and they can either just run this thing back and piggyback off the development of guys like Castle and Harper and even Wemby offensively at least, or they could make another move. Maybe they do move off Fox. Maybe they decide to consolidate some of those picks with the Devin Vassell and upgrade the wing spot. I do think that they'd be well served to get another high-level rotation guy that's got a little bit more size on the wing and could shoot and defend a little bit, like a Trey Murphy, for example. But they don't even need to make that deal. They just beat OKC in this hypothetical scenario. They just won the championship. Like, you could totally understand them running it back, but that's kind of the point, is that they're set up really, really well to, I'm not going to throw out the D word quite yet, dynasty, because I feel like it's always a little premature, but we thought OKC was going to run this league for the next few years, and it looks like San Antonio is as well set up or potentially even better set up just because they have Victor Wembanyama and the Thunder do not. And lastly, a win for roster construction through the draft. I think this is kind of the goal for a lot of teams is draft your 3 core guys, 3 consecutive seasons. Going to require some lottery luck, especially with the new rules, but the Spurs got that. And they showed that if you stay the course there, you can have a light at the end of the tunnel if you do get lucky there. And of course, they did obviously get very lucky moving up to number 2 for Harper, especially, and then also getting number 1 pick in the draft that Victor Wembanyama was in. But that is a kind of fun and interesting debate between them and the Knicks of like how these teams were built so entirely differently. But with a loss, it would obviously be a little disappointing since they are favorites. They're minus 185 on Vegas sites right now. But compared to expectations, again, it kind of feels like they're playing with house money. Like, unlike the Knicks, where it feels like this is their one and only chance, it feels like the Spurs will have many more chances in the future. And it would be pretty shocking if they never get back to this point, considering how early in Wemby's career that they did this. But obviously, they should not take this for granted because we have had 8 champions in 8 years. We have not had a repeat final team in 8 years. Every year we tell ourselves, oh, this team will be back. And often they're not. You know, the Bucks, after they won in 2021, I don't think anyone would have believed you that they wouldn't even get back to a finals after that. Same thing for Denver. They were pretty big favorites out of the West the next year. And everyone thought, oh, well, they're definitely going to get at least another one at some point. And now they look like they're in massive limbo. Like, Boston's been bounced kind of unexpectedly 2 straight seasons after their dominant finals run. OKC this year doesn't even get back to the finals. Like, it is very, very hard to do this consecutive times or even twice in the span of however many years. So if they lose, they shouldn't totally take for granted that they definitely will get back, but I do think that they probably will. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be next year, but at some point in Webby's prime, they're definitely going to be back in this spot. So that's why, to me, it kind of feels like it wouldn't be the end of the world if they lost, because I said this earlier, but if you told them they were going to be the 6th seed and win a playoff series, they would have signed up for that in a heartbeat. I don't think anyone in this organization or on this team thought that they were going to win a championship this season. So we are kind of in the weird scenario with this finals where it feels like both teams are kind of just happy to be here and playing with house money a little bit. Like, I don't think either side is going to be massively disappointed or have some big, like, dang, we really should have won that, or this season was a failure, anything like that. Like, both these teams, wildly successful seasons, both these fan bases should be ecstatic that they're in this spot. And regardless of who wins, like, I don't think the loser is going to be super, super bummed more than they should be, other than just the fact that obviously they were close to winning a title. Okay. So now I am going to give my formal prediction here. And I have the Spurs winning this in 6 games. The way I had it playing out was Spurs winning game 1, Knicks winning game 2 and game 3, and then the Spurs winning 4, 5, 6. I do think that this will be a highly competitive series, and I want to just say that I think the Knicks do have a really, really legitimate shot to win it. I think these teams are, with how the Knicks are playing, pretty evenly matched overall, and I think the Knicks actually are uniquely positioned to match up pretty well with the Spurs. I think that they, in some ways, are more equipped to beat them than OKC was just in their compromised version, because I think that they can play a really scary 5 out that most other teams can't, because they have Cat as the sort of a game changer at their center spot. I think that they are a team that's not super heavily reliant on scoring in the paint, and they do shoot a lot of jump shots and make a lot of jump shots, which is a little bit more sustainable against the Spurs than it would be trying to rely on getting to the basket. And they're a lot better of a shooting team than a team like Oklahoma City. And they do kind of have the mojo of like the 2014 Spurs or 2011 Mavs, the 04 Pistons, even like the 2024 Celtics. Like, these teams that just feel like they're peaking at the right time and all the stars aligned, and they're playing such good connective basketball that they're in a position to even beat a team that's been better than them for most of the season, because they just came together at the perfect time. But I still have some, obvious doubts and concerns for them in this series. They have not played this type of competition. The Hawks were a 46-win team, and CJ McCollum was running the show for them offensively. The Sixers won only 45 games with a very compromised Embiid in that series. The Cavs, 52 wins, but led by two very inconsistent guards and inconsistent big, and just guys that have not shown up in the postseason. And if Cleveland made the finals this year, that would have been pretty ridiculous in my opinion. So again, I'm not going to hold that against them because they've dominated these teams, but I'm not saying that to invalidate how they've played or that they got there. I'm saying that to say that they better be prepared for a big jump up in competition. And I'm not saying they won't be, but the Spurs won 62 games this season. They just took down a 64-win defending champion in the back-to-back MVP. They are just a totally different animal defensively and honestly offensively than any of the teams they faced to this point. So the way that the Knicks have been winning, it's not going to be the same in this series. And so there could be a little bit of an adjustment to the physicality, the defense, and just the overall talent and skill that the Spurs have. And I just feel like the Knicks' margin for error is a little bit thinner than the Spurs. So there's just a lot of things I think could be like a death sentence for them. If Mitchell Robinson, I think that's one of the biggest swing factors I called out today, but if he's out or completely compromised, then I just find it hard to believe they're going to have the size and rebounding and defense that they need to be able to win this series. If they cool off from their shooting heater that they've been on, they've absolutely shot the hell out of the ball. They're 51% from the field for the entire playoffs, 40% from three for the entire playoffs. Like if those even tick down to like 47% from the field, 36% from three, which are still respectable numbers, but that's a big difference. I don't think they're going to shoot in near 50, 40, 80 splits against the Spurs. And so if they're not making their shots, can they still compete in the same way? We just saw Mikal Bridges to start this playoffs, the first 5 games, averaging 7 points, 1 assist, and 1 rebound. Like if they get that kind of performance out of him, then a lot more pressure is going to be on Brunson and OG and some of the other guys. And I do have some concerns about if Brunson is going to be bothered the same way Shea was, but they score a lot in a lot of the same ways, trying to get downhill, use their footwork, their physicality, score in the mid range. And that just didn't work super well for Shea, at least not at the efficiency we're accustomed to. And so I can't rule out that kind of same thing would happen with Brunson, even though I do think he's more reliable as a 3-point guy and gets to the rim a little less than Shea. So he's a little less reliant on that. So, but regardless, like Brunson's probably going to get his points, but it's just how efficient is he going to be? Is he going to shoot 48% or 42%? That could be the difference right there too. Whereas with the Spurs, I just feel like they have more certainties. And I know for a fact Victor Wembanyama is going to be elite defensively in this series. I know for a fact that he's going to be able to cover up any mistakes the perimeter guys make on defense. I know for a fact that the Knicks are going to have a hard time scoring in the half court. They just are, even though they've been so good there. Like this kind of defense beats really good offense unless you're making ridiculously hard shots consistently, which I don't know if they're going to do that. I know for a fact that Wemby, is he going to play great every game? Probably not, but I do think he's going to have at least 3 to 4 really awesome offensive games. And when he has those, they're really, really hard to beat. So I just think like you got to like bake in 3 wins for the Spurs in those games, because then they're going to be just nearly impossible on both ends of the court. I know for a fact that their guards are not going to be scared of this moment, because I would argue the moment of a Game 7 on the road in the conference finals against the defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder is as big as any game they're going to play in this finals. I know the finals are the next round, so you could argue, well, the finals is just always a bigger stage, but I think context of series matters. And I think getting over that hump of beating OKC is as big of a moment as a Game 3 on the road against the Knicks. So I know those guys are they going to shoot great every game? Probably not. Are they going to turn the ball over more than they should? Maybe in some of these games, but I know they're not going to be afraid of the moment. And they really only need 1 to 2 of those guys to step up in any given game. They don't need all 3 of them to be great to be able to win these games. And I know for a fact that the Spurs can win ugly. They've had off shooting nights. They've had nights with a ton of turnovers. And the Knicks, they haven't had to win a lot of games like these. I mentioned they're above 50% from the field for the playoffs, above 40% from 3 for the playoffs. And they're going to need to win ugly if they want to win the series, because the Spurs play ugly games, and the Knicks have a need to do this because they've been so good, obviously. But winning ugly is important, and the Spurs have done it multiple times in this postseason thus far. They did it against Minnesota. They did it against even Portland in some of those games. They did it against Oklahoma City. And I think those experiences and just the proof of concept that they can win when they don't have their best shooting night is important. And the main reason I'm picking the Spurs, I have picked against them and Wemby twice now in this postseason. I picked the Wolves to beat them. I picked the Thunder to beat them. And I just do not want to make the same mistake 3 times. I don't want to continue to bet against him or this team. And so I'm just going to default to the team that was better all season long, the team that is 39-6 in the last 45 games that Wembanyama has played at least 15 minutes, and the team that has the best player in the series and arguably the best player in the world. So Spurs in 6, but I still will give the caveat that the Knicks can win this thing, and it will not shock me at all if they do. If some of these swing factors flip the other way and it goes advantage Knicks, then yeah, they've got a real chance. But I'm tired of being wrong, picking against this Spurs team, and experience and all that I had as my reasoning. It's just clearly not a factor anymore because they've got the experience now. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA show. Very excited for the finals to kick off tomorrow and excited to see how a lot of these swing factors play out. But yeah, I will definitely have some coverage of the finals throughout. I'm still deciding if I want to try to fit in after every game or do just more of a mid-series check-in. Will probably be time permitting. But regardless, I will be here to cover it throughout, and yeah, this is what we watched the whole season for, or is this moment, and I think we're going to get a really good series, and I'm really excited to watch. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening, and I will chat with you soon.